Hello, Brittany. It's so nice to see you here on Zoom. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm really thrilled to just have this conversation with you about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the work you do, and just ask you these questions because I know you and I just thought that you have so much experience and I would love the whole world to hear
Well,
about it.
thank you for having me talk about this topic. I'm very passionate about it as an instructional designer, and I'm just looking forward to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely, Brittany. Well, just for the listeners who don't know who we are, let's just do some quick introductions. My name is Katrina Stoops, and I started my career as a part-time faculty professor. So I've been working at community colleges and universities for over 20 years, doing lots of exciting work. And then most recently, the last 10 years, I've been in e-learning and instructional design and curriculum development. But I've been doing a lot of projects that focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know that you also dedicated your entire career to promoting ideas, inclusive teaching practices and instructional design practices. Would you like me to introduce you, or you would want to introduce yourselves? I don't know. I'm kind of improvising right now here.
Sure. Hi, everyone. For those that don't know me, my name is Brittany Bean. I started my instructional design career actually in college as a college student. Actually, I designed a training along with my colleagues for over 200 student employees for orientation. And that's what made me interested in going into instructional design. My undergrad's in psychology, and it's a great way to combine both the fields together. I received my master's at the University of Tampa, my alma mater, and that's where I started getting a deeper focus in instructional design, particularly with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Part of my job also, I worked full-time with first generation and unrepresented student populations at the University of Tampa with some programs that we hosted, and I took that work with me and relocated to Seattle. Currently, I work at City University. Currently, I work at City University of Seattle, and I'm an instructional designer there, and I focus on building not just courses, but also training development, curriculum for faculty, and I also do research also on this topic.
Well, that's how I know you, Brittany. We both worked at City University of Seattle, and we both did instructional design. So we were colleagues on working on the same team.
Yes.
And I remember when we had those conversations about open educational resources and diversity and inclusion. You talked a lot about underrepresented students and first generation students. I have so many questions to you about that. And of course, we'll get into instructional design and how to design with this ideas for inclusion in mind. So I want to dive into that. But first, let's talk a little bit why you became so passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion when it comes to underrepresented students. So what attracted you to that?
Yes. First off, of course, obviously, I'm a person of color. Boom, shocker. And I went to a predominantly white institution, or PWI, for my undergrad. And during that time, as my experience as a college student there, I did receive support from the organization I later worked for full time for that department. And I was part of that organization where they provided textbook funding, for example, to underrepresented students, which helped me out tremendously in school because I was very poor. They also created events for us on campus. That way we can meet other students that are also like us. That way we have someone to connect with at our university, especially it was, at the time, it was only 5% of African Americans, particularly in my university. So it was also good just to meet others that were like me, that understood what I was going through, going to a PWI and navigating through that process. And I think that's what made me excited, just to give back to that population, particularly because I've been through those experiences. I understood it. So it was amazing just connecting with students that were going to the same university I was going to, and talking to some of them about their day-to-day experiences, being a minority student on my campus, or some of them particularly are also first generation students. So we don't always have just I think it's like a common misconception, particularly with first generation students, that they're all minorities. No, you also have Caucasians also that can be first generation. And we did have first generation Caucasian students inside my organization too. So it was great just talking to them, learning from them about their experiences being a first generation student. And that was one caveat, that I'm not a first generation student. My mom and my dad went to college. So it was great just hearing some insight from them and learning, like a learning experience, learning from them about their experiences, and then sharing my story to them too. A bit, I guess it's just like giving back to the population, because I can relate so much to just navigating through campus, having professors that were mostly white professors, and how do you navigate through that?
Well, what I'm hearing from you is connection. So connection and connecting with the students who had similar experiences was very important for you
Yes.
as a student, but then it became your mission and passion later to create those connections for the students for your university. Let's talk a little bit about connections, because I've been in education, working, as I mentioned, working at community college level and also universities for many, many years. And so that's my mission, bringing connection and bringing awareness about the importance of creating those connections for the students. Because I feel like in education, the focus is primarily on instruction, which is very important. Don't get me wrong, but I also feel that giving students opportunities to have connections and also get that support that is outside of classroom is
Mm.
also very important. Let's talk a little bit about that. So what were your findings? What were your aha moments, personal experiences, and stuff that
Yeah.
you learned from other students when it comes to creating a community?
Yes. Part of my responsibilities in my former role, I planned events about few events a month. So certain things varied. So there are some cases where we gave job career advice, for example,
Mhm.
how to dress in the workplace, how to go for an interview, what to say, what not to say, how to build a cover letter, a resume, etc. And we also had other events that were just more about bonding as a community. One example that I helped host on my campus last year was National First Generation Day,
Mm-hmm.
which actually I believe it just passed, if I'm correct, if I have my dates correct, it just passed. But that was one event that I helped host, just to have not just within our organization, but just students around the entire university just come together and just share that experience being a first generation student. And it was very eye-opening, just seeing just different students, some that I never met in my life. They're like, oh, this is such a great event that you hosted. I have someone I can relate to. I met someone here that I can now be friends with, which I think is very important, like you said, for students to have that connection outside of the classroom. As far as I'll say that, let's talk about career development. As far as the career development goes, something that I did notice about particularly students that don't have those resources to have someone mentor them through career progression or give them advice about how to dress for an interview, etc. I remember one case, I remember this before. I had a student interview for a position, and she wore a tank top and just shorts to an interview. And of course, like, yes, most people would say, like, what are you doing? Like, you're going to get fired. Like, what are you doing? But the supervisor at the time, she saw it as a learning experience for that student.
Right.
They may not know, hey, this isn't appropriate to wear. Even though, yes, it's an interview for a student employee position, it's still an interview, so you still need to
Mm-hmm.
dress accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that was the eye-opening moment. I would say, because fortunately I was able to have access to having a mother that's a working professional that was able to tell me, Brittany, wear this, don't do that, have your resume look like this. If I ever need to like apply somewhere to grad school again or something, I can go to her immediately and say, hey, can you look through my resume and make sure that's okay? But the reality is not everyone has that access, and they're navigating that on their own.
That's true. That actually, Brittany, reminds me of my experience working with adults in Washington State Community College ESL programs. We call it basic studies programs. Actually, each college calls it a little bit differently. And I would work with immigrants and refugees who immigrated to the United States. Some of them have been here for 20 years. Some of them just came a week ago, and they were all in my classes. And So it was interesting. I would have those conversations with them about culture and about how different it is when you go for an interview, and how to, just carry yourself, how to dress, but also, cover letter, resume, because when you come from a different culture, obviously you bring different experiences, but you may not necessarily know about how the interviewing process in the United States, how to, even bragging about yourself. So I call it bragging, like, highlighting your accomplishments. For example, I'm from Russia, right? In my culture, talking about your accomplishments, it's actually considered, well, it's kind of perceived quite negatively if you talk
Oh, wow.
about, your accomplishments. So it's actually, they would call you stop bragging. It's very different. And when I would have those conversations with my students who would come from all different countries all over the world, we would talk about how you present yourself, how you talk about your accomplishments. And sometimes my students would be like, oh, really? It's okay to say that about myself? I'm like, absolutely, absolutely okay. So that really reminds me. And so it's the instruction, but also the coaching, life coaching,
Right.
that happens in the class. And as an instructor, I was connected because I also had similar experiences when I came to the United States 15 years ago. Though I have a major in English and I graduated with this degree from a Russian university, I was teaching English at a Russian university. I was an English language professor. But when you come to a different country, it's just, yeah, it was, I was lost. So I could really relate to my students. And we, like, every time I would have a new class, every quarter you end up with a new class. So we would just bond and we would create this community. So yeah, definitely can relate to that, Brittany. Well, I am really interested to hear something about you mentioned earlier. You said that it was also a learning experience for
Yeah.
you, because that's how I felt about my students. It's not like I'm giving all this
Right.
knowledge, wisdom. No, I'm
Right.
also
Right.
learning so much from them. So I was just wondering, what did you learn? How did it make you maybe change certain beliefs, perception on
Absolutely.
things? I'm just
Mhm.
curious about that.
Right. So I will say the first thing, my first perception that changed, was that everyone had, I don't want to say equal resources, but everyone could gain that same resources I could to get into a college or a university. It's something that changed.
Mm,
And I would say my first or second month working in the department, one of my colleagues, I asked her actually to share her story about being a first generation minority student at her time. And she was explaining to me her process going through high school, how she couldn't rely on her parents per se to navigate her through those steps. She had to figure out things on her own. And I just sat there and listened, and I was like, wow, like I had a mom that was able to walk me through the college application process, and I also had a coach that showed me these things. So I had a lot more resources. So for me, it was easier for me to navigate through. I think I was ignorant at the time to it. It's the best way of describing it. And I would say that was one of my perceptions I changed was not everyone walks the same path as you to have access to a resource to get into a university. Another thing too was the adjusting to just a college experience altogether,
mm-hmm,
and not just like in the classroom. Yes, actually, yes, in the classroom, outside the classroom, extracurricular activities. And what I did observe at my time being a college student was particularly, I would say, the underrepresented population. They were involved on campus, but what's the best way? They did a little bit of things, or they'd rather just stay restricted in their bubbles. They didn't want to explore
mm-hmm.
other options per se, but it was mainly due out of fear of not being accepted by someone that doesn't
Right.
look like them. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But like I mentioned, you may not know, you may actually have a lot in common with that person just because they don't have the same skin color as you. Like you could take a white person and a black person, and they both could be first generation students, so you both probably have some type of similarity to share with your story.
Well, that's wonderful. Again, once again, I'm just hearing this theme about the importance of making connections, and sometimes students may overlook the importance of that and kind of retrieve to that familiar, and familiar sometimes
Right.
may be staying with, the same group. And I had similar experiences with working with immigrants and refugees who would be afraid to connect with American students because they felt for a variety of different reasons they just didn't feel comfortable. And
Right.
so that's why I feel like creating those opportunities for students to make those connections and provide that support is going to be, well, that's where you get your retention, because colleges and universities talk so much about completion and retention.
Yes.
And I've worked with immigrants and refugees, but also like, we can dive into like the second half of our conversation. I would like to actually talk about instructional design and online learning. That's where I feel many colleges are missing on that connection piece. So instruction is important, but what happens outside of class is equally important, and that's what will keep students in class. And we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute, because I'm really interested in, like, we both have experiences in instructional design, in online learning and education. And I've taught online, and I've coached faculty who teach online. So I learned so much from that experience, and I know you have lots of insights and moments that you would like to share with me too. Okay, let's talk about instructional design. Tell me about I don't even know. I can't even form the question. Diversity and inclusion, and also equity when it comes to designing hybrid and online experiences for the students. And that's the uh, teacher side, right? That's instructors working with instructional designers, multimedia support specialists, designing those experiences for the students. But also there is another side that I would like to talk about, the student experience. What happens when students enroll in those online classes and programs, and what we need to be aware about as educators and college administrators and leaders who promote equity on campus. So online, student side, and faculty side. Well, it's interconnected, but I kind of want to separate it a little bit.
Well, we can start with the faculty side first. Let's start with faculty. What I tend to discover with faculty institutions, a resistant to change. I'm going to be honest, like, not all faculty, but some. There is a resistance to change, primarily because, we've done this before. This has worked in the past. Why do we need to change things? And the reality is part of my research too, part of my background, my research, is that more minority students are applying to colleges, institutions. More first generation students are recognizing the importance of getting their degrees. Not only that, we have students, ADA compliant students, for example, within the accessibility area, correct. They're also applying also to institutions and wanting that same opportunity. So when you have special populations that are now coming into your institution, but yet you're teaching things that are still more Eurocentric, for example, or more related to just white audiences, and of course, that will create some type of conflict as an instructor. And I feel like the important part of instructional designers to come in is to be that consultant part for faculty, to educate them on best practices, particularly in those areas. And that's where some of my work started coming in with faculty. So for example, like sans serif fonts is a great example. Use that, please.
Why? So let's use this opportunity to just educate everyone just for a second. Why?
Yes.
Why is it important?
Yes, so particularly with sans serif fonts, simply put, is very legible. It's easier to read for students. So beforehand, a great example, APA papers. When I wrote tons of APA papers as a college student, psychology majors, is all we know what to do is APA papers. It's all we've done our whole time. And I believe that was the APA 6th edition at the time, and it was still normal to use Times New Roman for all your papers. But at that time, that was the norm to do so. But it was also not correct to do that especially considering that we're having more of these populations, particularly with the ADA community, are coming inside of universities. So when the APA manual switched over to the 7th edition, that's when they put sans serif fonts. So Arial and Calibri are the main popular two. But to sum it up, it's just a lot more legible. You can Google this and do a comparison of a serif font versus sans serif font. And what I mean by the legibility is serif fonts, they have more of a stylistic end at their letters. So if you ever seen on Times New Roman how the A looks kind of slanted like this, for example, versus a sans serif font, the A's are more simplistic in a flow. Just easier for legibility overall, why that's important. But yes.
Well, it kind of is just reminding me, it's somewhat related, but it is related to instructional design. So I remember now nobody really talks about Prezi that much, present, but 5 years ago, I remember they were so popular and everyone was using it. And oh my gosh, I literally would have, I cannot like
Okay,
look,
right.
it's like when I see those things moving,
Right, zooming and everything, right.
I literally, it's like my head would start spinning. It's like I could feel nauseous just like in a second. And I remember I brought it up to there was an instructor using the presentation, and then so we were supposed to look at the slides and have a conversation, and I just was very honest with the instructor. I said, you know, I had to close my eyes, so I was just relying on you narrating those slides for me. And kind of interesting. And he was like, oh really? I'm like, yeah, I just can't, I just couldn't look at those slides because I just, you know. And he was like, oh my gosh, okay, I'll just say, I guess I'll go back to, you know, old-fashioned PowerPoint. I'm like, please do. Do.
But PowerPoint, I recently done something with faculty also, and I designed micro learning videos for them to help facilitate that process a bit better, particularly with diversity, inclusion, and equity, particularly in those areas. So besides the fonts that I mentioned, considering your background color, your
Oh yeah,
presentation.
absolutely, the
Other thing,
contrast.
yes, contrast. And you'd be amazed how many times I have seen terrible contrast with backgrounds and
Yes.
fonts, colors, and it drives me insane because like I know I can't read this, and unfortunately I don't have like vision issues besides wearing glasses. But can you imagine someone that is colorblind? They can't see this. How do you expect them to do well? Like how? Other areas of adding captions when you're doing your voice narrations to a presentation, if you choose to record it, have some type of captions. Transcript, for example, for students that have hearing issues. That way they can read and understand what's going on, and for screen readers too. Other areas I've helped faculty with alt text in your images to give a description of what your image is, if it's something relevant that they need to look at. That way they know what the picture is, because not everyone can see that picture that's in your PowerPoint. Like, I think you can. You can see it, not everyone can. Other things I wanted to touch on particularly would just, I would say part of my research on what I am doing at the moment, I am researching what's going on currently in institutions and how some previous model frameworks and how they can correlate and what changes some institutions can make. So for example, at the moment, I'm working on my methodology process, but what I want to do is collect data based off of online courses, since we're talking about online courses, and to see how our instructors, how are they handling conversations related to diversity, inclusion.
Yes.
How are they handling these conversations? Are they making their discussion boards open to this? Are they presenting prompts about this? Are they making students engage with each other and learn something new? What resources are they pulling? Is it just particularly to seeing white people in every single history book that we have? Or are we seeing more areas from other cultures? So are we seeing things about Asian history, Latinx history, African American history, just to name a few areas? So that's some things I'm focusing on too. I want to see how online classes are built and how we can make changes as instructional designers. How can I or other instructional designers, how can we coach faculty to do so? One area I have been discovering with my research based off the literature review is that some faculty feel like they're not being equipped and trained with this at the moment. So they're unsure, also so they're unsure, where do I begin? I do want to help these students, but where do I start? And I feel like that's my civic duty as an instructional designer to come up with those best practices for them, which I mentioned a few examples I stated earlier. So I guess that'll be the faculty end. So if we sum it up in a nutshell, I would say some are resistant to change, and others that want to change, but where are the resources to help guide me through this? That way I can do better for my students. Do you have faculty in those two brackets? I've experienced both.
Well, I've also worked with faculty, training faculty on the principles of instructional design and curriculum development that would be based on the a universal design for learning approaches. And I've experienced both resistance, and I've had faculty who are just embracing those ideas and just like, oh, give me more, give me more. I'm loving it so much. And I just feel like, sometimes it's also becomes kind of a balance issue where you have so many ideas and you just need to focus on what is going to work this quarter, and then next quarter let's experiment with more ideas, kind of using project management as your guideline, because sometimes people can become so overwhelmed with so many things, and some would want to do everything at the same time, and other faculty was like, oh, I'm so overwhelmed, I don't want to do anything.
Right.
Your job as an instructional designer or as a learning and development professional is to actually make it easy for faculty to, first of all, understand where to start and then build on that and then provide that support, because I feel like part of the resistance sometimes comes from that feeling of being overwhelmed.
Correct. Yes, and I think that's a great point you brought up, Katrina. The importance of not overwhelming faculty,
Mm-hmm.
particularly, especially when they've done this for 20 plus years, especially some
Right.
tenure faculty, been doing this for 30 plus
Yeah.
years, and now you're telling me, well, now I have to change this. Now, oh my gosh, now I have to go back into my lectures and add captions. Oh my goodness, it's so much work. Where do I even start?
Start with the
And
first one.
the first one.
Just the first one.
I mean, this stresses the major importance of just start small, like
Yeah.
small. That's my advice. Just start with small steps. Small changes make bigger changes in the long
Mm-hmm.
run. That's how I think of things. And sometimes, when you start really big at once, it can become very overwhelming, very stressful, and just it's not good. Just start small. Then
It's kind of following the principles of change management when you want to implement any change, whether it's a big change at the organizational level or a
right,
small change just
exactly.
for your course. You always break it down into manageable, actionable steps and kind of do that backward planning. So you want to redesign your course. Okay, so you're not going to do that overnight. It's just not going to happen, period. Be realistic. So what can you do this week? Focus on maybe one change. I don't know, caption your lecture.
Right.
The first one, that's it. Next week, set a goal to caption maybe the second lecture or add something else. And once you start captioning your lectures, you will become more efficient. And then next time it will be much easier for you to do that. So kind of like I like to apply those project management,
Exactly.
approaches to everything, and working with faculty, particularly because being overwhelmed is a real problem right
It
now.
is.
It's just so much
It is.
pressure on all of us. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Let's just focus on what you can do this week. That's it. Forget about next week, this week only.
Exactly.
That's it.
Just start small.
Yeah,
Exactly.
start small, exactly. Well, let's talk about students and how online education, how students like or struggle, probably a little bit of both when they are in online classes, and how we as educators and also leaders can help our students navigate those challenges. So what's your experience with student
Yes.
side of online?
Yes, I can share my experience and what I've also observed too in my research.
Mm-hmm.
From my experience, my campus is traditional brick and mortar. So I attended all my classes were in person, but we submitted our homework, through our LMS at the time, which is Blackboard. So that's how we did things. When I started my graduate program, we did use a hybrid model.
Mm-hmm.
So we had class about, I'm trying to remember how many times that class. I feel like I met so many times. Let's say we met 2-3 days out the week. One of those days would be our online day, and that would be more of a day for us to do homework, or we'll work with our teams at the time to design an instructional design project or a piece there. and publish it on Blackboard. There have been other cases online too, where some of us, we would meet in a Google room, or a Zoom, for example, and we would just share different ideas, communicating with each other virtually. So that's just my experience with the online perspective of it. For me personally, it wasn't too difficult to adjust to going online, but I did see somewhat of a struggle and adjustment, particularly with the older learners in my program. We had pretty diverse age range. The older learners did struggle with that a bit more, like going from the full in-person to going online on some days. For my current experiences that I have seen, I would say somewhat similar. Particularly, I know due to COVID-19, we once had mixed. For example, we had mixed classes, mixed mode. Now we're going to strictly online. And some students can have that rough adjustment, just something simple as like logging into their account, to finding where are my classes. Other things are, how do I communicate with my professor when everything is done virtually? How do I do this? What is an office hour now, since they no longer have an office anymore? How do I do this? So there's little things I feel like sometimes like we think it sounds simple, like, oh, office hour, send them an email, but is it really that simple? There's things I started observing. In other cases with some students, which I think is very important with instructional design, especially with asynchronous content, is that you have to have some type of material that is engaging and it creates some type of collaboration online.
Absolutely.
So discussion boards. Yes, I'm not going to get in debate about discussion boards and where I am or where I'm not on discussion boards, but it's okay to branch out of those and come up with something else. One of the courses I've built, I created a resilience plan for a project management course, and where students are able to reflect on their experience at their workplace about a project that has failed.
That's great.
Sometimes good to reflect on failure.
No, failures are the best, because that's where the learning happens. When you failed, hopefully you failed and learned from that experience. And then when you shared with your classmates, with your peers, that's where the learning actually happens.
So that's what was the purpose of it. It was what was the situation, what went wrong, and based off of what you learned this week, this particular week, it was about resilience. What could you have done differently? And they can share it with their peers. And the other peers can reflect about their experiences. Oh wow, like Susan, I had the same experience too. This is what happened to me. They just build connectivism. You just build off of that and keep making a stronger connection about that topic. So instead of creating,
Brittany, can I interrupt you, because I just had an aha moment. So what you're saying is so important, and I don't know if we can categorize it as instructional design or teaching or curriculum, whatever. But in online, you kind of have to design the course with this in mind. So I would call it instructional design. So what you're saying is that instead of this mindset where a professor designed the course, dumps all the content in the course, and that's where the learning, that's the teaching approach. So what you're describing is using student experiences as an opportunity to learn, because in most cases, well, in community colleges particularly, the majority of well, I don't know if it's majority, but a big percentage of students are actually adults, and they bring so much experience, and creating those opportunities in your class so that students can share those experiences with their peers is so important, and sometimes is overlooked in instructional design and curriculum development. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, because I just felt, wow, this is brilliant. Sorry. Just
no, it's great. No, please acknowledge it. Other things I've done with some of my courses too, to break away from the typical lecture content, discussion board, submit an assignment, and be done. I'm not saying those things are bad. I'm not going to take my stance on that. But other things that I have done too, I have used simulations in some of my courses. So I would use third-party content to teach students about a concept, but instead of just having them read a case study, instead have them interact with a simulation, and then they can reflect on that experience too and share with their classmates. This is how my simulation looked like. How did yours look like? Actually, I got this idea from one of my classes in grad school. We had to actually use it I actually used it in one of my classes, but it's a project management game that we had to use. And it was a random company. You can name a random company, and it really showed you the importance of having different team members and what they can bring to the table, but also what do they lack at also. I want to not lack in a negative way, but what is something that isn't a strength of theirs, but it's something that can be worked on. So for example, you may have someone that moves 1,000 miles per hour, but they tend to make mistakes in every single thing that they do. Or you may have another person here that moves a lot slower, that may take them 3 days or a week to submit something, but the quality is there. So you have to learn how to work with both of those people in particularly. But it was a really, really interesting simulation. You play around with certain players and rank them, and based off of your budget, and it'll start projecting to see how your project ends up being. So if you end up assigning the wrong people to your team, so let's say you have everyone that's fast but makes tons of errors, and your budget's 50,000, you'll start seeing what ends up happening. You may end up going over your budget trying to fix those errors, for example, or you may have an angry stakeholder in that case. So I actually use that same simulation within my classes, but it's another way just to get them engaged outside of the typical online format, which I see all the time, which is lecture content, discussion board,
Right.
submit and be done, right?
Well, and what I'm hearing from you is modeling the experiences that students will actually end up having in a real workplace and in online, like you said. So the tendency is, content, videos, what else? Discussion forums, maybe a little bit of reflection, and that's it. And what's lacking, let's take project management as an example. What's lacking is creating those experiences, like conflict situations. How would you deal with this stakeholder? How would you deal with this one if you're working as a group? So giving students those experiences, like role playing even, right? So that all prepares them for those real life situations that they will end up having once they graduate from your program. Actually, I had a very interesting experience with that when I was helping design courses for a program that focused on let's just say education, just kind of want to generalize it a little bit. And when I looked at the courses, and they were all online, well designed, from the design standpoint, they were all designed, the font, the videos were beautiful, but because the focus, the program is education, so you are preparing the next generation of educators who will be working with the students. So what was lacking, creating those real life experiences. For example, the courses didn't have group projects, the courses didn't have those simulations where students would have to like maybe solve a puzzle or solve a real life challenge. And when I brought it up, I actually got some pushback, and the statement was, well, students don't like working in groups. Yes, that's true. That can be quite challenging for the students. But if we're preparing the next generation of teachers who will be teaching students online or hybrid, they need to understand, they need to deal with the real life scenarios and challenges. And the real life is everyone is working collaboratively. How are you dealing with those, negative experiences when you work collaboratively? And yeah, it was kind of an interesting, as an instructional designer, I had to convince the faculty I was working with that you need to bring those experiences in your classes and create opportunities for your students to maybe have challenges so that they can learn that group work is challenging, yes, but when you start working with the students, you will end up having those challenges. So practice now when it's safe. So I'm all for modeling and creating experiences in classes that are actually as close to real life as possible.
I also want to add additionally, to touch on a topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly with online courses. I mentioned earlier to students a variety of different cultures. One thing you want to take consideration. Other things too, I'm going to specify videos. Of course, have captions in any videos that you pull, whether that's online or videos that you create. Make sure that they have captions. And also use closed captioning. That way, like me, for example, I don't need captions every time. I can click out of that. But someone else, they may need closed captions. They can turn that option on. That's just something to consider when you're looking for videos particularly. Another thing too is to consider a global perspective with your courses. So find content that's outside of, I'm in the US, so outside of the United States, find things that are relatable to other cultures. So find something that's going on in China currently with COVID-19, for example, or find something that's going on with the Keystone Pipeline in Canada. That's some things that I did incorporate in my classes. That way students can have an understanding of other things that are going around them besides like what's here currently in the US since we're in the US. Another thing to consider when you're designing courses is to also have ideas, some limitations that can occur, and this did happen to me, and I actually learned something new designing classes. I did not know this, that YouTube is not allowed in China. That's something new I did not
Yes,
know
yes,
about.
that's true.
So I had to quickly go in and get rid of all the YouTube videos and then switch them over with other videos that weren't on YouTube. That way they still had access to the same content, but it was able for Chinese students to have access to it. That was something new that I did learn, and I can admit to my mistake and fix that.
Well, it's interesting what you said, and that's kind of an interesting segue that I didn't even think about, but you just brought it up. I'm like, well, maybe we should talk about it a little bit. Designing training, not just for college and university students, but design and training experiences for companies, for businesses, especially if their audience is global. Global audiences. So how do you design learning experiences when you have employees who are from all over the world? Because most businesses now have employees and branches in different countries, so their training departments, their instructional designers and learning and development specialists need to be aware of that and really think about the content that could be relevant, not just for somebody in the United States, but somebody in China or somebody in any other country. So I'm kind of really like as a thinking just outside of higher ed and just yeah, just overall instructional design and learning and development in general. Let's just, I know we didn't plan to talk about it, but I feel like it's such an interesting conversation.
It is. I actually had to experience this recently. I designed a training that was not related to higher ed,
Yeah.
and I would say to somewhat answer that question, telling the story. First thing I would consider is like your learner profile, so understanding the demographic, who is this going to. So if it's going to learners that don't have like an English proficiency as their best language, but they may majority of them may speak Spanish, for example, have that option to have a translator in your course. That's a great example of something to do. That way they can be able to understand the content. Other things I'll say I take in consideration is determining the modality of how you're going to launch your course. I am a big fan, it's all over my website, I'm a big fan of doing e-learning components, but particularly in micro-learning sessions. That way it's self-paced, especially for adult learners. I think one of the things I dread the most are taking compliance trainings that I can't exit or anything.
Oh yeah, that's brutal. And I've had experiences like this. You just sit in front of a computer for 2 hours and I'm like, oh my gosh, when will it ever end?
Great. So how I like to design my content, considering a global perspective for multiple learners. Let's say someone in London right now, they're way ahead of our time zone right now. So give them the option to come back to the course at another time. Give them an option to break the content down into smaller sessions. So one lesson can take you 5 minutes to complete. It doesn't need to take 2 hours to complete a lesson. It doesn't have to. I promise you it doesn't. When you really go through your content, it starts scratching out what you don't need. Oh, do I really need to talk about this?
Yeah.
Instead, and include a link, an accessible link inside a resource tab, for example. Have a tab for resources that are accessible for students to click on. That way they can discover that additional content if they choose to do so. Give them the choice to do that. Just don't include content just because in your courses.
That's true. That's true.
So the reason why I thought of this, because I designed one of my contents in an e-learning format that was in a micro-learning session, but I do have my doubts as instructional designer sometimes. I do doubt myself and say, maybe I should have done that, maybe I should have done this. And the other initial concept I thought about doing was doing a webinar-based type of training, but I had to also take in consideration of different time zones that everyone is in. I'm actually in a cohort at the moment, and it's set up like that where it's a webinar based, but it's so many of us in different time zones. I commend whoever is moderating the chat and moderating everything. That's a lot of work to
I've
do.
moderated a chat for 200 people. Thank you. Yep. Had that experience.
I don't do that. No. I commend you for doing that, Katrina. I no. But yeah, so I'm a big proponent of just e-learning, making it self-paced. That way, someone time zone that's 10 p.m. they can log in whenever they feel like it or log out, and it doesn't affect me per se. So I think that's one thing to consider with a global perspective. Just consider that translations if needed. Of course, the use of captions in your content. Something I want to touch on too is stepping away from Americanizing everything.
That was like, yeah, I was just thinking we need to definitely talk about that and how can we do that, because I mean, I am bilingual, so I speak Russian and English. I am bicultural because I've lived in the United States for so long, but not my entire life. So I still remember my life in Russia very well because I left when I was 27, so I was an adult. And designing, so if you design training, whether it's e-learning, synchronous, or any type of training, but you have global audience, you have stakeholders and clients from different countries. So how to avoid, Americanizing your content. So that's been kind of on my mind for a long time. And I have some ideas and things that I failed miserably, and I learned so much from that because I just use failure as a great learning opportunity. I'm dying to hear your perspective, and then I can share a little bit about what I learned.
One of the things I have learned just in my experience, but also as an instructional designer, of course, I'm American, but I've had to learn to realize that not everyone is American and understands American lingo or slang.
Yes, I've lived in the United States for so long, but sometimes those abbreviations, like, somebody's texting me, like, what does this mean?
I remember one time I cheered you on and I said, "Go, Ekaterina," and you were like, "What do you mean? Where am I going?" And I'm like, "No, go as in
Yep.
Oh, oops, I did that. Yes, but it's something I had to really I had to unlearn this. I had to stop teaching myself how to stop using American lingo or terminology within my content, but just keep the language very generic and very simplistic and simple, easy to understand. That's something I'm very big about. I don't want to give my learners a wall of text to read information. I'd rather condense that wall of text into 3 bullet points or into 1 sentence. That's how I like to design my courses. But I would say definitely the American lingo. That's one thing I would say, which I can relate to in my personal life. I have a friend of mine, and we were eating food once, and I told him, "Oh my goodness, this hits the spot." And he looked at me and was like, "What are you saying to me? What hit what?"
I don't understand.
Something I'm being more cognizant of.
But even within the same language, say British versus American, sometimes you're like, well, what are you saying? I don't understand you, right?
We're in London, and like we talk sometimes like on video chat, and we just talk about different things. We're both speaking the same language, but even then, he's like, what? That's something simple, or spelling the word favorite, for example.
Spelling.
Right. Other things I would say, as I mentioned earlier, was to broaden your content and not just have it focused on the US. So try to have content that's focused in other countries too. But additionally, don't assume that your learners know what's going on within the US too.
Absolutely.
Right. So I would say a great example, the November election that's coming up. Don't assume that everyone understands how American politics works and how our judicial system operates. So instead, you may want to, let's say you're presenting a course about U.S. government, for example. Don't assume that your learner knows what an executive branch is, what a legislative branch is, what a judicial branch is. You may want to include just a simple way to explain what this means. But in my courses, I will also give an option for the learner to I'll say not really skip, but skip the content if they're already familiar with it. That's what I mean by that self-paced process of it. So for example, me, I know what the three branches of government are. I know how they operate. So in my case, if I was a student, I would just like click next. Like, I already know what this is. Click next. I go to something else. But someone else that may not be familiar with the U.S. Politics system, they may want to understand a bit more. What are these three branches of government, and how is this impacting our November election? Just some things to consider. I would say the biggest thing I would say is like don't assume things about your learners and assume that they understand the way that the U.S. works. Same with slang and lingo. Just keep the language very simplistic for them to understand.
Well, I have a similar but slightly different example of so I'm designing training coaching program that focuses on leadership and management, and I'm collaborating with a person from Vietnam, and the idea is to do the training for Vietnamese executives and managers. I have a lot of experience in leadership and management development, but it's all US based. I would not even dare to bring this content to, say, somebody who is in Russia, though I'm from Russia and I'm very familiar with their approaches to leadership and management. I chose to work with a consultant from Vietnam who understands their leadership model, and we are collaborating together on, because the idea is that the executives and managers actually want to learn about American leadership and management development model. But I also feel like bringing a consultant who understands the culture and can help me shape the content in such a way that will not be offensive, or as who knows, I may not even think about certain things, and it may be, maybe inappropriate or offensive to somebody who is from a different culture. So I'm like, okay, my target audience is executives and leaders, managers from that country. So I need to make sure that I work with somebody from that culture who can educate me on many things that I just may not be aware about. And that would be my advice to anyone who designs training for global audience. You don't know all the cultures. You just simply don't know what you don't know. Sometimes may just find somebody who can help you, bring some examples, even simple things like photos, examples that would represent certain concepts, but from a different culture, from different cultures. And that could make your training more global, more diverse, more interesting, more appropriate.
Besides, of course, the instructional design piece, the importance of your subject matter
Content.
experts or your SMEs.
Yes.
And I'll be honest, I've had cases, multiple cases, where I had to do the research on my own, where I had to also be the subject matter expert, which I will not have my opinion for or against, but it's definitely, I would say for me, it's a bit more a learning experience, but a little bit more difficult going out and finding all the research on my own and trying to understand the concept. And it's easier for me personally to go work with someone else that has, I already know what this is about. I can coach you through this process. Just to add, that your SME doesn't always have to be this high level, like, executive. Everyone thinks SME has to be, like this high level person. Like, no, sometimes it's been my coworker, and I asked them,
Yes.
like, hi, like, about this particular audience more than I do. Can you share some insight? That way you can guide me through this. And they have helped me design some of my content, or even when it comes down to rubrics and rubric development. Like, hi, you have more experience than me when it comes down to rubrics. Can you please coach me why this should go here and not here instead for the students? So also reach out to your coworkers on your instruction, even as instructional designers, we can also be SMEs, but reach out within your community because they may know something that you may not know or you may not be aware of.
Yeah, well, you and I definitely share the same approach to instructional design curriculum development, because my core belief is a collaborative approach, and it may mean different things when you work on different projects. But I feel like when you bring diverse perspectives, your product is so much better than just you sitting and just dumping your personal ideas and beliefs into something. And again, that is all about diversity and inclusion, and how we can as instructional designers, as learning and development professionals, we really need to bring those diverse perspectives into the work we do, and that will make it even better and stronger and just, more efficient. That's been my experience. And Brittany, so thank you so much for sharing your insights. I know I was just dying to have you on this live interview for weeks. I know you're so busy, so I'm so grateful to you that you found time.
Thank you, Katrina, for hosting this and having me present about my experiences with this topic and some research I'm doing. It's just great, just bounce ideas like from another instructional designer, just understanding how both can make instructional design better.
And just to kind of wrap it up, our conversation, so we talked about ADA compliance and global audiences and mental health and project management. And it's all about actually diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's what diversity, equity, and inclusion is all about. It's so multi-layered.
Right.
I know we're just scratching the surface. That's why I'm like, well, let's maybe meet regularly and have regular talks. We'll think about it, right? But it's just the depth of the conversation has been amazing. Thank
Yes.
you so much.
Thank you again. Thank you for having me.